In Solo Leveling Arise, there are a ton of gear sets, where some are really, really good, and then others that are also really, really good, and then others that are not so good. Which is why in today's video, I'm going to go through all of the gear sets in Solo Leveling Arise and to find out which one is the best. And first gear set up is going to be the Destroyer gear set, and this gear set I think is really, really good, and it's going to be useful on a lot of supporting characters that you have on your team. As the 2-set effect basically increases your own ultimate gauge charge rate by 20%, as that's what your power gauge is. And then the 4-set effect basically says when the battle starts, it charges your power gauge or ultimate gauge by 50%, and then it will increase the player, being Jinwoo, and also the party's ultimate gauge charge rate by another 20% as well, which is really, really good. And I think this gear set will really benefit characters that don't actually spend a lot of time on the field when obviously in the hunter mode, or it can also just be really good on any hunter when you are playing as Jinwoo. As a character like Min Byung-gu is someone that you don't spend a lot of time on the field with, as you just want to get his skills down, his ultimate off, and then just leave. So then you can go ahead and swap to your main like DPS to do a bunch of damage, which means a gear set like this is going to be really, really good on him, because once you can just have him in the back just to give your whole party an increase ultimate charge rate, whilst also increasing his own to be able to apply those crit rate and crit damage buffs as well. Gear set number 2 is Solid Foundation, and this is honestly my favorite gear set in the game that I've seen so far, as essentially on the 2-set effect it will increase your basic attack damage by 18%, and obviously this is going to be fantastic on practically any DPS in the game apart from ones that just spam their skills non-stop, as obviously especially when you're playing someone like Jinwoo, you're going to be spamming your basic attacks a ton, so this is always really valuable on pretty much any DPS in the game. And then the 4-set effect is where this gear set really does come alive, as it'll increase your core attack damage by 18% as well, and then whenever you land your core attack, you'll then be able to charge your core gauge by 60 or at 60%, I'm not too sure. And this gear set will really, really shine on a character like Lim Tae-gyu, as his whole kit is basically based around his basic attacks as well as his core attacks as well. And then if we come to look at weapons, the Huntsman is going to be probably the best weapon to run this gear set with when using it on Jinwoo, as basically whenever you use this weapon specific skill called Judgment Time, you'll instantly get your core attack. And then whenever you use your Judgment Time, the core attack then changes to be called Time to Hunt for 6 seconds, and then increase the damage that core attack does by 60%, which is a huge increase. And then whenever the user's basic attack, core attack, or Time to Hunt hits the targets within 4 meters of Jinwoo, then you get an extra 50% damage increase as well. Onto the armed gear set, or the Black Lions gear set, whatever you want to call it, and this is just kind of your generic sort of attack based gear set that is just going to be useful on characters that scale off of the attack stat, as the 2-set effect just increases your the user's attack by 5%, and then the 4-set effect, when attacking, you ignore 15% of the target's defense and attacks. So overall this can be just used on any DPS character that doesn't necessarily want to do anything too specific, so it will always be a very generically good DPS gear set for you to have, especially if you've already got it built up. Next up is the one-hit kill gear set. This is going to probably be my second favorite gear set, as when paired with the other ultimate sort of power gauge sort of gear set, you can absolutely pop off a ton with this gear set. As essentially on the 2-set effect, you can get just an increase in 25% of your ultimate skill damage, which is always great. But the 4-set effect is obviously going to be the best thing about this, as it decreases your ultimate skill cooldown by a whole 40%, which is a pretty big amount. And especially on a character like Jinwoo, for example, whose ultimate cooldowns are relatively high, being 60 seconds, it means that you can probably spam this ultimate a lot more often than you normally would do in any form of content. And then on other DPS hunters, or on just hunters in general, this will be amazing as well, as hunters, I'm pretty sure every hunter in the game has a 45-second cooldown on their ultimates, which means if you're running this when you're playing in hunter mode, you'll be able to spam a ton of ultimates when using that gear set. Noble Sacrifice is the next gear set, which is going to be really useful on HP scalers, as the 2-set effect increases the user's HP by 8%, really good. And then the 4-set effect will decrease your own attack stat by 8%, but increases the team member's attack by 8% as well, which is really, really good, because although it sort of pitches it as a drawback on the gear set, it's really not. As if you were to use a character like Seo Jiwoo, for example, who is a HP scaler, because she just scales her damage off of HP, it means that losing your attack stat isn't really going to mean anything, because you only deal damage based off of your HP stat, which means when you lose that attack, it just doesn't mean anything. And then on to the slightly worse gear sets, unfortunately, we have the Guardian gear set, which increases the shield effect that you have by 30%. So that, again, this is going to be a probably very niche gear set for only characters that give shields and stuff, but will also be pretty good for those characters that do apply shields. And then the force set effect, whenever a team member, including the player, being Jinwoo, activates a shield, it will increase the damage they deal by 10% for 10 seconds as well. So yeah, it's not great because it's only for 10 seconds. So again, although there is no cooldown on it, so as soon as you keep applying shields, you can just pretty much hopefully have 100% uptime with this. But honestly, for me personally, not really too much of a fan of this. I'd rather just do something else and give something just to have a permanent increase in damage without having to worry about if I've got my 10-second buffer up or not. Solid Analysis is the next gear set, and this is all about dealing more damage when an enemy is under the break state, as the 2-set effect increases your damage dealt to enemies in the break state by 15%, which is a good increase, but again, this is going to be a relatively more niche sort of gear set, as the only enemies in the game that tend to have break meters are going to be bosses, which is not too bad, but again, there's a lot of enemies that you fight and a lot of bosses that don't have a break meter, so again, it's pretty niche. And then the force set effect says when attacking the weakness attribute, it increases your break effect by 30%, which then also increases how niche this is going to be, because not only do you have to have type advantage, but you, in order to get the buff, so it's just not really ideal. And what makes it even harder to use is the fact that not every boss in the game that does have a break meter has the ability to, I guess, restore that, because there's some enemies that can just give themselves their break meter back, and then there's just some enemies that just don't do that. So it'll only be a gear set that's actually useful for enemies that do give their break meter back to themselves, and that's pretty much it. And then we have the Toughness gear set. This is just kind of your Route 1 gear set, where you just get a 8% increase in your critical rate on the 2-set effect, and then a 32% increase in your critical damage on the 4-set effect. Nothing too much to say about this, apart from because there's not really too many crit DPSs in the game, I don't think. So until we get an actual really good crit DPS, I don't see this gear set being too useful as of yet. So out of all of these, which ones are the best? The Destroy gear set is fantastic because increasing your party's ultimate charge rate is just it's just amazing. The Dragon Knight's gear set, although is also relatively niche in terms of it's only used for characters that like to use their basic attacks, although a lot of characters, especially DPSs, will always use a lot of their basic attacks, so it's not too bad. But again, I can see why some people might not like this gear set, because it's only potentially going to be useful on characters that use basic attacks, but overall I still think this gear set is fantastic. And then the one-hit kill gear set I think is just honestly phenomenal, because the ultimate damage and the skill cooldown on your ultimate skill is just really good. It's just so good. And then onto the other side of the artifacts, where you have, I believe, 6 more gear sets, so let's get to it. Concentration of Firepower is the first one, where you have the 2-set effect of increasing your skill mana point consumption rate by 20%. Unfortunate, but then increases the damage that you deal by 5% and decreases the basic skill cooldown of your basic skills by 5%. And then following that up, you have the 4-set effect, which just it basically just buffs the 2-set effect, and that's pretty much it, as it basically buffs the damage increase from 5% to 18% and the cooldown reduction from 5% to 18%. So once you get this gear set to the actual 4-set, that's when it's going to be somewhat useful, but you are still retaining that increase in skill mana point consumption rate by 20%, which is not ideal, but if you do have a ton of mana points, it can be manageable, but it's going to be relatively difficult to build a character around this gear set, which makes it okay, but not the best. Outstanding Connection, I think, is a fantastic gear set in my opinion, as on the 2-set effect, whenever you tag out, so essentially this will only be useful on the Hunter mode, as you can increase the attack of you and your team members by 12% for 10 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. So unfortunately, this is not a permanent effect, although it is a 12% attack increase for 10 seconds, which is still really good. However, it's the 4-set effect that makes this sort of 20-second cooldown a lot more manageable, as the 4-set effect will increase the attack increase effect from 12% to 28%, so a much bigger increase, and then the duration of it from 10 seconds all the way to 15 seconds. Now I'm going to assume that the cooldown starts as soon as the buff is applied, which means if it lasts for 15 seconds, that means you only have to really necessarily wait for 5 seconds in order for you to actually apply that 28% buff for 15 seconds again. So I think this is a lot more manageable than other ones, so I think it's really good. The Expert gear set is a gear set that is based around a lot of RNG, but when you do get the RNG, I think the damage bonuses you'll get from this will be massive, as basically whenever you land a crit, you have a 25% chance to increase your attack by 0.8%, which will stack up to 100 times, so you'll be able to get, what is that, an 80% increase in your attack pretty good, not too bad. And then the cooldown of that is going to be for 1 second. And then the 4 set will increase the activation rate from 25 to 50% and the attack increase from 0.8 to 1.6, which means you can get up to 160% increase in attack, which on paper does sound very good, but there's a lot of sort of things that you have to bypass in order to actually achieve that. As normally a lot of gameplay stages last for around 3 minutes, so you do have a limited amount of time to get all of your stacks up. And not only that, you have to crit them, so you need a high amount of critical rate, which is going to be really difficult to do. And not only that, you then have to, assuming you have the 4 set effect, you need to win the 50% chance of you to actually get that attack increase. So yeah, this gear set is a lot of risk, a lot of reward, because you have to meet a lot of criteria in order to get these attack bonuses, but when you do get them, because they're pretty much permanent, they'll be really, really good. The Berserker gear set is a gear set that I feel like is going to be potentially very good when used with a certain weapon on Jinwoo, and that's probably it. Because whenever the user, being you, has 50% HP or less, your damage will increase by 15%, and then the 4 set effect will basically increase the HP condition to 70%, and the damage they'll increase to 30%. And this would, I think, pair really well with the Shadow Scythe, as the Shadow Scythe consumes your HP to increase your damage by 100% of your actual skill, which is pretty good. But if it was the actual enemy's HP, then it would be much better. Unfortunately, it's not, so it means that sort of gear set is only useful when used with like weapons like these, as not a lot of the time you don't really want to be losing much HP. The Executioner gear set is, honest, in my opinion, just a much better version of the Berserker gear set, as the 2 set effect is pretty much the same kind of thing, as when your enemies have 40% or less HP, you get an 8% increase in damage, which is awful, but the 4 set effect makes it much better, as the HP condition goes from 40 to 70%, just like the Berserker gear set, and then the damage increase is 20%. So this is definitely a really good one, I feel, because once you've gotten your enemies down to 70%, you just get a free 20% damage increase for the rest of the fight. Champion on the field is going to increase your attack stat by 5% for 4 seconds whenever you land a crit, and then has a 1 second cooldown, so very similar to one of the other gear sets we showed earlier. And it doesn't say how many stacks you can get originally, but the 4 set effect basically says you can, the attack increase effect stack maximum increases to 4 instances of this buff, so I think in total you can have a 20% attack increase, which it's not great because you've also got a crit in order to apply it. So for me, it's not my favorite thing, but I don't know, the wording for me is a little bit weird, so I'm not too sure how this works. But again, it could be decent, but I don't think it's too crazy. And that is it for the other side of the artifacts. So which ones are the best ones? So for me, the 2 best ones are going to be the Outstanding Connection gear set, as this is going to be really useful in Hunter mode, increasing your whole team's attack stat by a decent amount. And then the Executioner gear set is going to be great on a lot of your main DPSs. And then I think the Expert gear set can be really good because you can get a massive amount of attack increases, but it is pretty risky to use, as you're not going to be able to get this all of the time. And then Concentration of Firepower I think is not too bad, but I think you're going to have to need a specific build of character in order to be able to use this effectively. So there you have it. That is all of the gear sets within Solo Leveling Arise. A lot of them are really good, to be honest, especially the main gear sets, and the other ones where you have like the necklace, the rings, the bracelets and stuff aren't as good, unfortunately, but some are still relatively useful. But if you enjoyed this video or you found it useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!